Imagine waking up one day to discover that inside you, hidden deeper than your heartbeat, quieter than your breath, lies a secret message written long before you were born. A message so precise that it determines the color of your eyes, the strength of your bones, the way you smile. And yet somehow it's still unfinished. Imagine being told that this message, this code, is still being edited by every choice you make. That secret is your DNA. Those whispers of possibility are your genes. People often think genes are fate, as if we are trapped inside the limits of our biology. But what if I told you that your genes don't hand you a script, they hand you a story outline, and you get to write the chapters? What if the code inside you responds to your courage, your habits, your environment, your voice? Science calls it gene expression. I call it the proof that you are not a prisoner of your past, but an architect of your future. Inside your cells are switches, millions of them, waiting for signals. And every time you decide to learn something new, push through fear, practice discipline, or choose hope over doubt, you flip one of those switches. You activate a new possibility. You awaken the part of your code that was asleep. You are not only what your ancestors gave you, you are also what you choose to do with it. Think about that. Somewhere in you right now is a gene that remembers strength, another that remembers resilience, another that carries brilliance, waiting to ignite. You may not see it yet. You may not feel it yet. But it's there, waiting for a moment when you dare to rise. Your DNA is not a cage. It is a compass. And every step you take rewrites your direction. So the next time someone tells you, that's just how you are, smile and remember. The secret code inside you is not finished. You are still evolving, still becoming, still activating the greatness your genes quietly hold. Your bloodline gave you the ingredients. Your choices will create the masterpiece. When we speak of DNA as a mysterious inner blueprint, we're not simply referring to a biological instruction manual tucked neatly into the nucleus of each cell. We're speaking about something far more intimate, an ancient manuscript authored by forces older than memory, older than culture, older even than the concept of the self. It is the mythic backbone of your existence, a symbolic architecture that Jung himself might have called a living archive of the collective and personal unconscious. Within this blueprint is a pattern that does not merely dictate physical form, it shapes predispositions, intuitions, sensitivities, the subtle emotional textures through which you encounter the world. Think about this, long before you ever opened your eyes, before you developed preferences or fears or desires, the blueprint was already unfolding within you, silently laying down pathways that would one day become your instincts. Those uncanny movements of the psyche that feel both deeply personal and strangely universal. DNA is not simply chemical, it is narrative. Its structure is mathematical, but its meaning is existential. When you sense some deep pull towards something, toward beauty, toward fear, toward intimacy, that pull often emerges from patterns encoded long before you had language to name them. The psychological dimension of DNA becomes clearer when we consider that every cell in the body holds the same genetic script, yet each cell interprets that script differently depending on context. In the same way, every human carries archetypal patterns, universal psychic potentials, yet the environment, the family, the culture, and the inner emotional climate determine which potentials take form and which remain dormant. DNA gives you the alphabet, but life teaches you how to read it. There is a sexuality encoded into the human blueprint, not in the narrow, physical sense, but in the broader psychological sense of libido, the life force that drives creation, attachment, curiosity, and transformation. It is the same energy that urges a seed to push through soil, a child to explore their surroundings, an adult to seek intimacy or meaning. This drive, which Jung understood as an energy of the psyche rather than a purely erotic phenomenon, is woven into the genetic script. Your DNA does not merely shape your biological sex, it shapes how you experience the world as a sensual, longing, meaning-seeking being. And yet, for all its influence, DNA remains fundamentally mysterious. The blueprint is not fully visible, even to ourselves. There are impulses we inherit that we cannot fully trace. There are emotional rhythms within us that echo distant ancestors, people you never met, whose fears and passions still whisper through your nervous system. This is not mysticism. It is the psychological reality of genetic inheritance. The body stores memory in its own language, a language that predates conscious thought. But the blueprint is unfinished. It is the most important thing to understand. We often imagine genes as fixed, as if each strand of DNA were an immutable verdict. But this is a profound misunderstanding. The genetic code is more like a mythic script with multiple possible interpretations. You might inherit a predisposition toward anxiety, but the environment, your psychological choices, the relationships you cultivate, the boundaries you establish, and the meanings you make, all these factors determine whether that predisposition becomes a limitation or a source of heightened awareness. Genes create the opening of the story. You are responsible for the unfolding. The blueprint inside you does not merely shape your abilities, it shapes your potential, and potential is always conditional. It waits for you. It requires your participation. The very structure of DNA is responsive. It listens to the way you live. Stress, joy, trauma, connection, ambition. All these experiences send signals deep into the cellular world, influencing how genes express themselves. In other words, the blueprint changes depending on the psychological and emotional narrative you choose to inhabit. This means something profoundly empowering. You are not simply a product of inheritance. You are a co-author. When you face a fear instead of retreating, when you cultivate discipline, when you pursue knowledge, when you allow yourself to feel deeply, pain, love, desire, loss, you alter the internal environment in which your genetic blueprint operates. You awaken capacities that might otherwise lie dormant. You soften tendencies that might otherwise harden into destiny. In Jungian terms, the blueprint becomes most alive when it is integrated into consciousness. To know yourself deeply is not merely a philosophical exercise. It is a biological awakening. Self-awareness changes which parts of your inner code are expressed in the world. The more you engage with your own depths, the shadows, the conflicts, the longing, the brilliance, the more fully you inhabit the potential encrypted into your cells. So when you think of DNA, do not think of it as a limit. Think of it as a challenge, a call from within. It is the code of millions of years whispering, become more than what was given to you. Become the next evolution of your own story. And in that realization lies the power. Your blueprint is ancient, but your future is not. If we consider genes as both inheritance and potential rather than destiny, we are invited into a far more nuanced understanding of identity, one that merges biology with psychology and instinct with consciousness. Every gene you carry has a history. Some of those histories are heavy with ancient survival struggles. Others are luminous with creativity, courage, or tenderness. Yet none of them, not a single one, is a final judgment on who you must become. Genes provide a direction, not a conclusion. They present a landscape, but you decide how you will walk it. When Jung spoke of the psyche as a dynamic interplay between inherited archetypes and lived experience, he was intuitively describing what modern genetic science is confirming. Inheritance is not a fixed destiny. It is a field of possibility shaped by internal choices and external conditions. To inherit a pattern is not to be bound by it. You can carry a predisposition toward fear and still become brave. You can inherit emotional volatility and still cultivate self-mastery. You can inherit longing and transform it into art, connection, or spiritual depth. The genetic code does not force you, it invites you. It asks, what will you do with what you've been given? Much like psychological complexes, genes contain a dual nature. They can empower or constrain, and the direction they take often depends on how consciously you engage with them. A predisposition towards sensitivity, for example, might, if left unconscious, manifest as anxiety or withdrawal. But if integrated, that same sensitivity becomes emotional intelligence, empathy, and creative vision. Similarly, a predisposition toward aggression might remain destructive if never examined, but when brought into awareness, it becomes assertion, leadership, and vitality. In this sense, genes mirror the archetypes. They hold immense power, but they require the ego's participation to become constructive. There is also a sexual dimension to this dynamic, not merely biological sexuality, but the deeper psychological energy that fuels growth, attraction, conflict, and creation. The erotic charge within the psyche is closely intertwined with genetic impulses that push you toward bonding, reproduction, intimacy, and connection. Yet this energy is far broader than sexuality itself. It is the very spark that compels you to reach toward life. Genes embed certain instincts, desire, longing, curiosity, and these instincts form the raw material of psychological development. But how that energy expresses itself depends on your level of self-awareness. For some, this energy becomes compulsive, driven by unconscious patterns inherited from family lines. Patterns of attachment, shame, avoidance, or intensity. For others, the same genetic currents become channels of creativity, passion, or deep relational presence. The difference lies not in the DNA, but in the consciousness brought to it. When psychological sexuality becomes integrated rather than repressed or splintered, the genetic impulses transform from blind drives into purposeful forces. In this way, your genes provide the energy. Your psyche provides the direction. What complicates this dynamic, and also enriches it, is that much of what you inherit is not purely physical. You inherit emotional patterns, relational templates, instinctual biases, and unconscious loyalties to family histories. Some of these elements are transmitted through genetics, others through early environment, others through subtle intergenerational influences. But regardless of the source, their meaning is the same. You are born with tendencies, not destinies. And if you choose to remain unconscious of them, they will express themselves automatically. Just as a gene expresses itself unless selectively regulated. But the moment you bring awareness to a pattern, whether emotional, sexual, relational, or existential, you create space for transformation. This is why self-examination matters. Awareness is a biological force, not merely a philosophical one. To reflect on yourself, to question your impulses, to understand your fears, to trace the origins of your desires. This work reshapes how your inner code manifests in the outer world. In Jungian terms, consciousness alters fate. In biological terms, environment, including the inner environment of thought and emotion, alters expression. Genes do not dictate which stories you must live, only which stories you are most prepared to live. Whether those stories become tragedies or triumphs, imprisonments or liberations, depends on the courage with which you meet them. You may inherit a temper, but you do not have to live angry. You may inherit impatience, but you can cultivate presence. You may inherit longing, but you can direct it toward meaning rather than compulsion. The genetic script is powerful, but it is not sovereign. It bends, adapts, listens, responds. It waits for you to give it shape. And in this waiting lies your freedom. You are the interpreter of your inheritance. You are the sculptor of your impulses. You are the bridge between biology and intention. So when you think of your genes, do not hear them as commands. Hear them as possibilities, each one asking you a single essential question. If we look closely at the relationship between genes and experience, we begin to see something remarkable. The code inside you is not merely reacting to life, it is in a continual dialogue with it. Your choices, your environment, your inner psychological climate all act as messages sent inward. And the genetic blueprint listens with astonishing sensitivity. This is where biology and psychology intermingle so deeply that the boundary between them becomes almost poetic. The self, in this sense, is neither purely inherited nor purely constructed. It is an unfolding conversation between what you were given and what you dare to create. One of the most overlooked truths is that the environment is not only external. Your environment includes the thoughts you cultivate, the relationships you choose, the emotional atmosphere you maintain, the beliefs you cling to or challenge. Each of these influences the inner conditions under which your genes express themselves. When your inner world is shaped by fear, resentment, or habitual self-sabotage, the expression of your potential constricts. But when it is shaped by curiosity, discipline, or emotional openness, that same potential begins to expand. It's tempting to imagine genes as passive ingredients, waiting for some chemical event to switch them on or off. But psychologically, the process is far more dynamic. Your repeated choices, whether to confront discomfort or avoid it, to speak truth or retreat into silence, to pursue connection or isolate. Send signals inward that reinforce certain pathways. Over time, these pathways shape your tendencies, your patterns, even your temperament. It is not that you are rewriting the genetic code itself, but you are influencing how the code manifests in your life. This becomes especially clear when considering the power of mindset. A mindset is not simply a set of beliefs. It is a psychological posture that influences perception, emotion, and behavior. A growth-oriented mindset doesn't magically reprogram DNA, but it alters how you engage with challenges, and those engagements alter the internal conditions under which traits unfold. Resolve tends to unlock capacities that remain dormant under resignation. Confidence can activate competencies that insecurity suppresses. Hope can preserve possibilities that despair prematurely destroys. In Jung's language, a mindset is a crucial mediator between the unconscious and the conscious. It shapes how archetypal energies find expression through you. If the unconscious carries a predisposition toward fear, a disciplined and courageous mindset can transform that predisposition from a paralyzing force into heightened awareness or strategic intuition. In the same way, a predisposition toward passion can become either chaotic impulsivity or creative brilliance, depending on how consciousness chooses to engage with it. Genes provide the fuel. Mindset determines the direction of the flame. Consider how relationships sculpt our inner landscape. Human connection is one of the most potent environmental influences because the psyche is inherently relational. You are shaped by the people you allow close to you, their emotional patterns, their expectations, their values, their capacity for intimacy or avoidance. The nervous system responds to relational experiences with profound sensitivity. Safety expands you. Neglect contracts you. Love opens doors in your psyche that fear would keep locked. And through these psychological openings and closings, the blueprint within you adapts. There is also an unmistakable sexual dimension to this interplay. Desire, psychological desire, not merely physical, functions like a gravitational force in the psyche. It draws you toward certain environments, certain relationships, certain challenges. This longing is essential because it pushes you into experiences that either awaken or distort your potential. Sexual energy carries both creative and destructive possibilities, and how you choose to channel it influences the entire inner climate of your development. When desire is unconscious or repressed, it tends to manifest as compulsion, confusion, or fragmentation. But when it is acknowledged and integrated, it becomes a profound source of vitality, depth, and direction. Your genes do not tell you how to express desire. They simply make it part of the human inheritance. Your choices determine whether that desire becomes connection, creativity, conflict, or self-discovery. In this way, psychological sexuality becomes one of the most powerful regulators of the inner environment. It can harmonize your development or destabilize it. What is crucial to remember is that your inner atmosphere is not static. You can choose to cultivate clarity instead of chaos, discipline instead of distraction, honesty instead of self-deception. Each of these choices has an accumulative effect. They become habits, and habits become psychological climates. And those climates shape the stage upon which the genetic potentials within you come to life. Your genes are not indifferent, they are responsive. They respond to the foods you eat, yes, but also to the emotional tone of your relationships, the quality of your thoughts, the intensity of your desires, the courage of your decisions. They respond to the symbolic world you inhabit, the stories you tell yourself about who you are and what you are allowed to become. When you choose growth over stagnation, presence over avoidance, truth over comfort, you are creating an inner environment where your highest potentials have room to breathe. The blueprint does not change, but its expression does. In that expression is the essence of your becoming. So if there is one thing to take with you, let it be this. Your choices are not small. They are signals, and your genes are listening. If we accept that your choices and inner environment influence the expression of your genetic potential, then we must also acknowledge the immense power that self-belief and resilience hold in shaping the trajectory of your life. These qualities are not merely motivational slogans. They are psychological forces that interact directly with your inner blueprint, altering the way your deepest potentials take form. Self-belief is not a naive confidence. It is a fundamental orientation toward life. A tacit agreement with oneself that growth is possible, that change is meaningful, that the inner code is not fixed but waiting for engagement. When you believe in your capacity to evolve, you activate entire networks of behavior, emotion, and cognition that move you toward that evolution. Resilience, in turn, is the ability to remain whole while undergoing psychic pressure. It is the flexible tension between vulnerability and strength, the capacity to bend without breaking. Jung often spoke of the individuation process as a confrontation with what feels overwhelming. The shadow, the unknown, the unintegrated aspects of the self. Resilience is the psychological muscle that allows you to withstand these confrontations without collapsing into fear or regression. It is the interior scaffolding that supports the transformation of raw potential into lived character. And when resilience is active, the genes associated with stress response, emotional regulation, and adaptability begin to express themselves differently. You are not just mentally stronger, your body becomes a participant in that strength. It is no coincidence that self-belief often awakens during moments of profound inner conflict. Conflict stirs the psyche. It disrupts stagnation. It forces you to examine which parts of you have been allowed to live and which have been cast into exile. Without conflict, potential remains inert. The tension you feel when facing your own limitations is not a sign of failure. It is the signal that your inner system is reorganizing itself around a new possibility. This is how psychological energy transforms genetic predisposition. Through the willingness to remain engaged even when clarity has not yet emerged. There is also an erotic dimension to self-belief and resilience, an inner vitality that is inherently generative. This is not sexual in the narrow sense. It is the deeper psychological sexuality that Jung associated with libido, the creative impulse that drives all growth. When you believe in your ability to expand beyond inherited constraints, that energy begins to circulate more freely. Desire for meaning, for connection, for growth, becomes a constructive force rather than a compulsive one. The psyche becomes fertile. New patterns can take root. New expressions of the genetic blueprint can surface. People often underestimate how quickly insecurity and self-doubt can distort the expression of their inner code. In single belief, I am not enough, I don't deserve this, I will never change, can create an internal climate that suppresses potential. The body responds with tension, withdrawal, constriction. Creativity dims. Curiosity closes. The system becomes self-protective rather than exploratory. And the saddest part is that the genetic capacities for brilliance, strength, or empathy remain present, just suffocated under the weight of a narrative that never belonged to you in the first place. Self-belief, on the other hand, opens the psyche. It relaxes the internal grip of fear and allows deeper instincts to emerge. When you dare to imagine yourself differently, you send signals inward that change the emotional and physiological conditions of your development. The blueprint begins to unfold in new ways. Your inner architecture reorganizes itself around possibility rather than limitation. Resilience strengthens this process by giving stability to your transformation. Without resilience, self-belief collapses at the first obstacle. But resilience teaches you to withstand the friction between who you were and who you're becoming. It teaches you to interpret setbacks not as signs of inadequacy, but as part of the psychic stretching required for growth. When you cultivate resilience, you are training your entire system, mind and body, to remain adaptive under pressure. You are teaching your biology to stay open instead of shutting down. And as this psychological flexibility deepens, the blueprint responds. Traits that once seemed unreachable begin to surface. Skills that once felt unnatural begin to integrate. Emotional patterns that once dominated begin to lose their hold. You start to realize that resilience is not the absence of difficulty. It is the ability to hold your ground while difficulty reshapes you. It's important to remember that resilience is not stoicism. It's not suppression or brute strength. True resilience includes softness, sensitivity, and the willingness to feel deeply. It is the recognition that vulnerability is not weakness, but the doorway through which new potentials enter consciousness. When you allow yourself to experience life fully, the joy, the pain, the longing, the uncertainty, you provide the conditions for dormant aspects of your genetic and psychological inheritance to awaken. This is why both self-belief and resilience are transformative forces. They do not change the code inside you, but they change the conditions under which that code takes form. They expand the range of expression available to you. They turn predispositions into strengths, instincts into wisdom, desires into direction. You may not control the blueprint, but you control the posture with which you face it, and sometimes that posture alone is enough to change everything. So carry this with you. The moment you choose to trust your own becoming, your entire biology begins to rise to meet you. If you begin to see yourself not as a collection of traits, but as a unique code, one that is constantly interacting with life, reshaping itself through awareness, choice, and courage, then a profound shift occurs. You realize that you are not a passive outcome of biology. You are an active participant in your own becoming. The secret code within you is not a fixed identity. It is a living intelligence, one that evolves as you evolve. And when you recognize this, you start approaching your life with a different level of responsibility, reverence, and possibility. Every person carries a genetic signature that has never existed before and will never exist again. This uniqueness is not limited to physical attributes. It extends into the psychological and symbolic layers of your being. Your way of feeling, thinking, longing, fearing, desiring, this combination is singular. It is as if nature has written a one-time cipher into the fabric of your body and psyche, awaiting interpretation through the way you live. Jung would call this the individuating self, the part of you that strives toward wholeness, that pushes you to become the most authentic expression of who you are meant to be. When you stop comparing yourself to others and begin examining the contours of your own inner architecture, you realize something vital. Uniqueness is not an obstacle to overcome. It is the compass that guides your path. Too many people waste years distrusting their own nature, trying to force themselves into inherited templates or cultural expectations that suffocate their individuality. But the blueprint inside you does not thrive under imitation. It thrives under authenticity. The more you align with your intrinsic patterns, your genuine interests, your natural rhythms, your instinctive ways of connecting, the more fully your genetic and psychological potential can unfold. This process is inseparable from the depth of the psyche. You cannot discover your unique path without confronting both the light and the shadow within you. Your shadow often contains the rejected parts of your code, the impulses you were taught to suppress, the desires you felt ashamed to acknowledge, the talents you feared to own. And yet, within that rejected material lies an enormous reservoir of energy. It is impossible to fully understand your uniqueness without reclaiming those disowned aspects. Desire, anger, tenderness, ambition, sensuality, creativity, each is an expression of your inner blueprint. When denied, they distort your development. When integrated, they empower it. There is an inherently erotic element in this unfolding, again, erotic in the psychological sense, not merely the physical. The libido that Jung described as the life force is deeply intertwined with your individuality. It is the force that drives you to explore what is yours, to reclaim what you abandoned, to follow the inner pull toward experiences that reveal who you are. This energy is not random. It is directional. It moves toward authenticity with instinctive precision, pushing you into the situations, relationships, and conflicts through which your unique pattern becomes visible. To honor your uniqueness means listening closely to this inner pull, even when it leads you away from what feels familiar or socially acceptable. It means letting the deeper truth inside you speak louder than external expectations. And this requires a kind of inner courage, one that is not loud or dramatic, but steady, persistent, and intimate. The courage to choose your own path is the courage to become conscious of your own nature. What many people don't understand is that this self-realization is not self-centered. It is generative. When you live from your true pattern, you naturally offer something to the world that no one else can. Your perspective, your creativity, your emotional rhythm, they add something to the collective that would otherwise be missing. You become a contributor rather than a copy. You become a participant in the unfolding of human potential, not an echo of someone else's script. And the world responds differently to someone who lives from authenticity. People feel the integrity of it, the grounding, the clarity. Even if they cannot name it, they sense that you are aligned with your own code. This alignment radiates a psychological coherence that influences others, giving them permission to explore their own individuality. Authenticity creates authenticity. The deeper you go into your own nature, the more you illuminate the path for others. But the journey toward embracing your uniqueness is not always comfortable. It requires shedding layers of conditioning, psychic armor, and inherited narratives. It requires letting go of chronically seeking approval, validation, or conformity. And it requires trusting the intelligence of your own inner processes, even when you don't yet understand where they're leading you. This trust, once cultivated, becomes transformative. It is the moment you stop fighting your nature and start collaborating with it. Only then does your blueprint become a guide instead of a mystery. Only then does your uniqueness become a strength instead of a burden. Only then do you realize that becoming yourself is not a luxury, it is your responsibility. So remember this, the world does not need another imitation. It needs the one thing only you can bring.